is Make a Live broadcast right here on DBS Television. My name is Timothy Polion. We go up until 10 o'clock this evening, at which time we'll be concluding with the clip that peaked. Of course, later we'll be taking your calls, and I'll be introducing my guest to you in just a moment. Quite appropriate that we focus on a scourge that is definitely taking an immense toll on us as a people in St. Lucia, in some cases directly, and in most instances indirectly. And calls are being made on the wider St. Lucian society to tackle it, and calls are also being made to the authorities to play their part. We hear a lot about the need for the police to be better trained and for the government of St. Lucia to provide the police with the necessary resources. We also have been hearing a lot about the forensic laboratory, which came into existence in a functional state in the year 2010. 7 years have elapsed, and we're still getting a sense that it's not performing at its optimum, and there are various deficiencies that should be addressed. And this is occurring at a time where crime is of immense concern to us, and this year we have already recorded some 52 homicides. Very scary, considering that we have another 6 to 7 weeks left in 2017. My guest is a forensic scientist. He is Mr. Louis Murray. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Tim. Good evening to your viewers.
From your perspective, what are we dealing with right now in terms of our crime problem? Forget the statistics, because it's already telling in terms of the 52 homicides for this year. The response, is it adequate?
Well, there's a lot more that can be done by the authority, by the police, really. People talk about preventing crime. Now, we have to look at it. I usually tend to look at it from two aspects. You have the preventative, and where that fails, you have to be able to resolve the issue. Some people will tell you, how can you prevent every crime? The police can't be everywhere. And that is true. That is true. But in the event that you cannot prevent a crime, the onus is really on the authorities that we have to try and solve that crime.
But before we go to in-depth and dealing with the specifics and so on, can we take steps that would tell the criminals that basically we have an upper hand, that chances are, if they engage in one criminal act or the other, let's say commit a homicide or killing or murder, that chances are that they will be caught?
Yeah, well, the proof is in the pudding. Then they have to see what exactly is happening, because I believe
we must have a success record.
Right, criminals are smart. They're monitoring. If you remember last year, I think it was, or 2 years ago, when there was this alleged rape on the square, and the comment, Derek Walcott Square, the comment made by the alleged perpetrator, whoever it was I have done it before. I mean, I'm not worried. They're not catching anybody. So this is the thing, and this is one of the things if you look at the forensic, is that forensics can help in the resolution of a matter, of course, with the police work, investigative work. But if we can combine the two successfully, then you look at your solve rate, and then this can act to deter people from committing certain crimes, because they know they're likely to get caught. But once they feel that they can get away or get off, or that this is not functional or that is not working, then it's like a free for all, so to speak.
What really led to us having the forensic laboratory coming into existence? A project that was undertaken several years ago, as I said before, and was commissioned in the year 2007. Something must have caused this.
We had before the new lab in 2010, we had a unit which operated out from the laboratory in Victoria Hospital. And we were able to do a lot of good work, and especially in cases of sexual assault. We didn't have DNA, but we were able to do certain analysis, and if necessary, we will send DNA samples away. The government took a decision, I think somewhere in 2004 or 5, the government at the time, to step up the game. and let's see if we could get a better unit, get things more organized. And that in itself was a good move. I think there's some people who might have said, should we have had a forensic lab? I think we could have, because there was enough work to, you start at your level. You're not going to have a major facility, but you have enough work to cope with what's going on. And it meant that we could have done a greater level of sophistication than what we had at the hospital.
What was our success rate then, during that era?
We had success in a number of cases. For instance, we had, I remember our first case where we brought in DNA evidence, as far as I know, into St. Lucia, was the Thelma Hyson murder. That and there was a conviction. That is the case in which the last hanging, Solomon. We did work on.
That was in 1995.
Somewhere around that time. Yeah. Then there was Valerie Lord, the murder of Valerie Lord. There was Donna John. The interesting thing about the Donna John case that was in Vieux-Fort is that all of the forensic work in that case was done right here in St. Lucia. We didn't have DNA. That was an exclusion. We've had a number of hit and run vehicle accidents. In one of them, we got assistance from the forensic lab in Trinidad. And I have been involved in at least 3 hit and runs where we have done the work right here, and there was a time where I had to go overseas to get some additional work done. So we found that we were doing enough to take that leap, and which is what was done for the new lab in 2010. But I think that it wasn't well planned, and it wasn't.
Why do you think that was the case? Do you think that there's too much haste on our part?
I think there was a jump to do the lab in a, with the show, so to speak, that we are doing something. We have a forensic lab. But what the government, the authorities at that time didn't realize, that you needed to have some planning. You have to know what services you want to put in, what are your human resources, how you have to get people trained. And I think there was a rush to put a building. We have a forensic lab. And that was a mistake. They didn't have the proper plan. None of the forensic people, I can speak for myself, we didn't have an input into what was going on in the construction of that lab. Now, so that was one of the...
But if the people who were supposed to be manning that institution did not have an input, that is a big oversight on the part of the authorities.
That was an oversight. There might have been reasons, but that was an oversight.
But it's a case where those people are pretending to be forensic scientists?
Well, no, what I think is that the authorities were more concerned in building a facility. So you could say, look, we have built a lab. But actually, as to the whole logistics and the thing, what consulting people in it, that was literally absent. So you found that the lab was built, and unfortunately, Tim.
But a lab is just if you remove the input of the expertise, it's just a building, it's just a structure.
Yeah, but some people they don't think, they just think that you have a building and I can say, I have built a lab. What goes on that is what has been carried on into the present time. We have the lab, but how much work is going on in the lab? So
you're saying from the word go, in terms of constructing the building, that there should have been consultation with the experts,
there were problems,
and that did not take place.
And what made it even more acute is that the forensic service collapsed in 2005, which was the existing service.
That was operating from the Victoria Hospital?
That's right. Non-support, and it collapsed, which meant that our forensic service collapsed just at the time when the new lab was being built.
Do you think it was allowed to collapse?
Well, the support was not forthcoming.
Because I'm sure that many of my viewers will tell you that the crime situation has been an area of immense concern long before 2005. So to allow that facility to collapse, I think that would be a serious dereliction of duty on the part of the authorities.
Tim, that speaks to the interest. What is the real interest? Because if you allow your service to collapse, it means that how much interest is there? And then, as I said, it happened at the time when the new lab was being built. And that was the time when your service had to be maintained to sort of get in readiness for the new lab. And,
you think that there should have been a smooth transition?
It should never have been, but there were reasons, and the service collapsed. And it was most unfortunate that it happened at that time when we needed to have staff in play, in action, getting ready for a smooth transition, which meant that after that, the service was reintroduced. It was reintroduced in 2007, and that sort of helped to pave the way for the new lab.
During the interregnum, the break between 2005 and 2007, then who would be conducting such work on behalf of St. Lucia? Most of the stuff would have to be sent overseas?
Now, it was very selective because you're not going to, you find that they would not have been sending everything away. So they would have been selective in certain cases. But a lot of the work was collected and stored, just stored.
Would that account for example, the backlog of cases and cases dragging over an inordinate period?
No.
In the absence of evidence?
Not at that time, because what happened is that when we started the service in 2007, there was that backlog. But I can tell you that almost about maybe 70 or 75% of the casework was contaminated and had to be, disposed of. We lost about...
So what would happen to those cases?
Well, they would have
to be thrown out?
They would have to have moved along without the forensic aspect. I'm saying the evidence. That aspect would have been lost, so they would have had to have gone on maybe with eyewitness or however best. But we lost that percentage.
Do you think, Mr. Murray, that could be the result of, in some instances, where, for example, people who are accused of committing certain crimes are falsely found guilty of those crimes?
Not why, for what reason?
In the absence of the use of the evidence.
Well, you have
the forensics, sorry.
Well, you would have to go with whatever you have, and the jury will have to make a determination based on what is available, and which is really what would have been happening in, way back 50, 60, 80 years ago. That time.
But we're not talking about that era. We're talking about a supposedly modern, enlightened era.
Well, at the end, what would have happened, Tim, most unfortunate, but these cases would have had to have gone on without the forensic evidence. So jury would have been, they would not have had the benefit. They would have to make a determination based on what was presented to them, whether it is eyewitness or whatever forms of evidence. And that would have been problematic maybe especially for cases where you would need scientific information. So, as you say, what would have happened?
Is that all the reason why we should not, therefore, support the death penalty? Because somebody could have been sent to the gallows, and just on the basis of what the jury would determine to be substantial evidence, but that evidence would not be based on the science.
Well, that puts problems when you talk about the death penalty, taking a life, because forensics has shown it, particularly DNA, that it has brought back a lot of cases, and people who have been wrongly imprisoned, imprisoned or maybe even on committed death sentence. So that's why we have to strive as much as possible to getting excelling in our scientific approach to cases, because you find that, as you say, you can't pull back a life. And we've seen the evidence where DNA has has gone both ways. It has, put somebody on the spot, or it has removed somebody from the spot. So this is one of the reasons why when we, in 2010, but just before that, the lab that was being built, which opened in 2010, there wasn't a DNA unit. But what we found was that the government at that time, and the previous governments, was spending too much money in referring cases for DNA. I mean, it is staggering the amount of money the state has paid to have DNA done overseas. And so we thought it would have been good if you can invest in your own unit, and that money could actually be going back into moving your unit along. And that was one of the alterations made in the new lab to include a DNA unit. But unfortunately, the lab things went wrong, and we today we don't have unable to do the DNA in casework.
So what kind of work does it carry? Does it perform?
Where's that?
Into the forensic lab.
Well, right
If
now,
not DNA.
the last that I would have known was the statement from the minister, and I think the director, that they were opening and that with a limited workload. As to what exactly they are doing, I think because I'm not at the lab, so I would not want to speak as to what they are actually doing. But I would think it's fair to assume that a lot of an amount of the major work involved in especially homicides and so are not really being tackled, particularly the DNA. But exactly what they are doing, they would have to speak to that.
But do you think we put the cart before the horse in having this infrastructure set up and not having the trained personnel? Should we have done it the other way around, have the trained personnel in place before the structure was actually open?
Yes, it could have been done that way, but all was not lost. Even we could have had it even going simultaneously, because like I said, we had a service, but that service was allowed to collapse. And that was a major setback for the lab that was opening. Now, we opened the new lab in 2010, and we had a number of exams. We didn't have a full complement, again, because of lack of preparation. But we had a complement of workers who could have moved the lab forward. But the lab ran into problems again, and the workforce diminished, and we didn't get the replacement of those we lost. One of the things that I will mention, Tim, and that's a mistake, and I think that mistake might still be made even up to today, is the thinking by the authorities that you have your forensic people, you go to a university, you get your BSc in forensic, and that you could come to a lab and work. It doesn't happen that way. The actual life, learning almost, of a forensic scientist is when he comes into a lab where he's employed at. This is where he really brings life to his degree.
You need to be exposed to casework?
You need to be, because when you go to the universities don't train you in casework. You do a number of applications in theory. I was telling somebody some time ago that even a lot of the equipment, the instrumentation that is used in forensic labs, a lot of the universities, they don't have it in the forensic unit. You'll see a lot of that through the books. They tell you, you get a picture and you see this instrument is used for that and that and that. I had that experience myself. We were never exposed to that instrumentation. When you get into your lab, that's the first time you actually dealing with that kind of equipment. But that equipment is important for casework, which means that when you graduate from a university, you come into the lab, then you go through a period, maybe 2 years of training under a trainer, a more experienced examiner. And this is the problem that we have had in the lab, because we haven't had the quantity of trainers to train the new person. So you come from a university, let's say, you get an appointment at the lab. Now the ministry will think, but you have a degree, you are qualified in forensic science. What's your problem? Yeah, but then a police officer comes and presents you a bag of casework. You lost because you have never tackled casework in the university setting. You got to have, and that is something that you have to bring the training in the lab. Get the people trained, their workers trained. And I must say that it's not the fault of a lot of the workers who are there in the lab. They are willing, they are ready, they want to perform, they want to work, it's a field they want to get engaged in, but the authorities have to give them the means to get the training to do the casework. And I think that has really been the core of the problem why the lab has not been performing as it should, because lack of expertise, trained, well-experienced expertise to do the testing.
You're watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television. My guest this evening, forensic scientist Mr. Louis Murray. We'll continue the discussion in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. Of course, we'll be taking your calls later, so please stay with the broadcast. You're watching Newsmaker Live on DBS Television with me, Timothy Polion, and my guest, forensic scientist Mr. Louis Murray. Mr. Murray, with the increasing criminal activity taking place in St. Lucia, most of us are just preoccupied with the homicides. What happens when the police visit a crime scene? Do the police work in collaboration with personnel at the forensic lab? Or is it a case where they're looking for the evidence to be submitted to the forensic experts?
Okay, one of the mandates of the lab when it was opened in 2010 was to provide the police with backup expertise in crime scene management. And this actually is one of the areas that I used to operate in. I don't know. I think now the police at the crime scene, I'm not too sure. Maybe the lab would be able to speak to that, or the police, how much they rely on the lab, or how often the lab people are called out. But then again, it means that you have to, if you're coming out from the lab, the lab needs to have an element of crime scene specialists, trained persons in that, to be able to offer the police support, because the crime scene department at the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, they are trained, they receive their training in crime scene examination.
But we're hearing that we do not have properly trained crime scene investigators in the Royal St. Lucia Police Force.
Now
the National Security Minister, Senator Herman Francis, took offense to this. He's saying we have a sufficient number of people who are well trained, to the extent that we have personnel at the RSS headquarters providing training in that area.
Well, if you have, but I'm talking about practical on the ground. You have, for instance, I know we have a lot of trained crime scene examiners. Now, I like to use the distinction, because a lot of people I hear, they talk about crime scene investigators. You have to be careful. What is a crime scene investigator? And what is a crime scene examiner? There are two different roles. Because examiners, which is a lot of what we do, are persons who will search, collect evidence, record evidence, do the photography, package the evidence, then initiate the custody chains. But the crime scene investigator, he is different. He is the man or the woman who stands back, never too much involved in the crime scene. What he is doing is he's evaluating the evidence as he moves along. He wants to see, is that evidence consistent with the scene? What is the disposition of the evidence? He is not busy collecting. And that is the role of the investigator. Because it is from the investigator you want to look at, was a scene staged? Yes? Or was the person killed at that site where the body was found, or was it some other place and it was moved? These are what investigators do. They start to question the evidence. They don't have time to be going around picking up exhibits. They stand back to look at the evidence. But something is missing.
As far as you're aware, is that how our police officers operate?
Insofar as crime scene investigation, they would have to say, they would have to indicate if they have trained, if there are people operating at that level. I am not too sure about that. But they would have to. But you see, you must be careful, and you can't mix examination with investigation. And they have their distinct roles. And it's from the crime scene investigation. Then
We'd just like to say to our viewers that some of what you might see might be a little bit troubling to some of you, so we'd like to alert you to some of the footage that you might see on our broadcast right now.
And from the crime scene investigation, then you get into the crime scene reconstruction, which is the final phase. But you see, you have to be careful what is said and what is actually on the ground. Because we talk about manpower shortage in manpower resource of the crime scene investigators, of crime scene personnel, sorry. So then you have to ask yourself, is there enough manpower to have crime scene examiners and crime scene investigators?
Yeah.
I mean, you're literally talking of about 5, 6, or 7 people. Sometimes you might find a crime scene here might be 2. I know some years ago, a police officer, we were discussing a particular case, and he told me I was the only crime scene officer in a homicide. 1 to do fingerprinting, to do photography, collection of evidence, package of evidence, chain of custody. That's a lot.
Because
what time would that person have to be able to do evaluation of
because
the scene?
it's not far-fetched in today's world that you could have 3 homicides in separate parts of St. Lucia occurring on the same day, on the same evening.
Time.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? Right? And which brings it more into focus. So the other thing too is that you find that which is on a side, en passant, is that you find that a number, sometimes you get the officers who are trained, sometimes they move on. They move from their training crime scene work, you hear they are posted at a different thing. So you get this juggling of people around, which really is not good, because crime scene now is a specialist thing, and if you train in that, you should really, that should be your field till, you know, grand old age in the police force, so to speak, because of course that even brings experience. So if we're talking about crime scene officers doing training in the regional jurisdiction, okay, they might be but are these same persons on the ground helping out in the day-to-day homicide investigation at the level of investigations, right? And then would they be distributed equally throughout the region? Okay, what are your resources for murder in Cap Estate? What are your resources for murder in Bonte? Is it going to be the same resources that you will bring in for an old lady killed in Saltibus or killed somewhere in Soufriere or Moshi? At that level, we should. But then do you have the resources to go around? And that is, I think, a problem. Numbers. The police need to have increased numbers in crime scene management.
Now, increasingly the police would call on members of the public to provide them with support, assistance, in terms of eyewitness accounts and so on, in case you would have seen the occurrence of a crime, particularly a homicide. And people, they are very hesitant when it comes to coming forward to provide evidence to the police. We've heard time and time again the need for a witness protection program. Budget after budget, we have heard this. Should the two be working together in terms of a functioning forensic lab, well-trained police officers and eyewitnesses? Or can you, if the eyewitnesses will not come forward, can you do without the assistance?
No, I think we should never discount eyewitness evidence, testimony. And the public need to be encouraged to play their part. So they need to be encouraged. If you see something or you know something, you pass it on to the police, you give them that information. But here's the trick, Tim. If you're passing on information, let's assume you are a little bit, you know, hesitant and so. That person might say, look, officer, I can say certain things, but I don't think I'm going to commit myself to maybe even making a statement or coming to court. But if you have your lab functional, working, you can allow that person to point you in a direction. Yes? Give us a tip, give us some clue, and we will take it from there with the physical evidence. And you can work your case through that. But if you don't have the scientific evidence, then you're relying on that eyewitness solely to come to court. And you know there are issues with that. Coming back to your witness protection, Tim, that point you raised, I am not too sure. I mean, I've heard it bandied about witness protection. I am not too sure if we can afford a witness protection. Witness protection program takes a lot of money.
When you say we might not be able to do it on our own, but how about operating as a sub-region?
Yeah, but Tim, a lot of the islands, we're swimming in the same boat, you know. Can we, I mean, they try something in Trinidad, but you see what's happening. Witnesses being killed leaving the courthouse, in front of police stations, and so. So the whole system, I don't think, is tight enough. And because in the eyewitness program, you have the question of the paper trail. And you have to have certain things which will not necessarily have to be accounted for, because that's the nature of the program. There's a fair amount of secrecy and so. So there is room for a lot to go wrong if you don't have that sort of system properly managed. Really, if something should cost you, say for argument's sake, $40,000, it might end up costing you $80,000, because money can be, you know, resources can be drifting here and there. But I really think, and that is my concern of the eyewitness program. Can we afford it? I mean, look at what government is faced with. We're faced with roads, we're faced with schools, we're faced with providing health care. Then you have to put money into an eyewitness program. People will say, well, yes, a life is important if it's a murder here, but then sometimes you don't even get a guarantee. What happens when the witness comes up on the day of court? Loss of memory. Where are you in your eyewitness protection program? So I think that the government, you need to continue with your forensic, but you don't throw away your eyewitnesses. You work hand in hand. Fine, you can have somebody coming to court as a witness, and then you have your scientific evidence coming. And like I said, if the person is tentative, they can point you in the direction and say, look, I notice so and so and so and so, and the police will take it from there, and let's see if we can get physical evidence associated with that
in an instance where, for example, somebody has committed a crime, and the police would go on the hunt and would effect certain arrests, 2 or 3 people and so on, you have limitations in terms of how long you can keep that person behind bars or for questioning, 72 hours. Would the police officers and the forensic lab, would they be in some hurry to put their case together in terms of ensuring that the evidence will be able to stand up in court before they charge those persons with any crime? Because if you cannot do that within the 72-hour period, you'll have to release those people. Does that affect your case? Well, and probably cause some people to abscond?
Well, I mean, you realize one of the overriders is the post-mortem. Mm-hmm. There's no charging before the post-mortem. So if your post-mortem is going to be 1 week down the road, then you're in possible trouble if you're 72 hours. But then again, assume, let's say your post-mortem is within that period, and you had your report from the pathologist, and that can pave the way essentially to sort of, well, I say pave the way, I don't say you want to charge, but then now you want to look at your forensic, your evidence. Now, I wouldn't say in a hurry. You mentioned about being in a hurry. You have to be careful. We're not in a hurry, but you need to have certain foundation evidence which will sort of guide the police in that we might be on the right track. But that evidence now comes with, you can do that relatively quickly with your own lab. The moment you start going away is, Tim, that's a process. Government has to look for the resources for the plane ticket. Where is the money coming from? You have to start looking at packaging your exhibits. You have to prepare documentation, because that carries excessive documentation, referrals. You have to get your people ready. That means weeks are going, you have to get a lab that's going to accept your work. When you send that work away, all these labs away, they have their domestic demands.
So you're put in a waiting list.
You might be on a line. And worse, if you are unable to even help yourself, because when I did referrals years back, I would send, a lot of times I would send discrete samples. So I would be able to examine my evidence and extract what I want and send these things away. But if now you're going to send a lab, I'm just talking generally, if you're going to send to a referral lab a bag of clothes or 2 or 3 bags of items, you on a line, they say, what, where is this from, St. Lucia? We put that aside. When we get a little chance, we'll be able to. So all of that is time going. So not uncommon why you will find police officers will say after a long time, but people will say, what about referrals? Mm-hmm. And they say, well, we have to wait, nothing yet, and so on, so on, so on. Because you really, you know, you have to take your time with these referrals, because like I said, they have their domestic demand. There's a lab who used to help us in the region. They used to do work for us. And I was speaking to the director not too long ago, and I said, what about if you had to do work for St. Lucia? And I was told, no, our demand is too high. We wouldn't be able to help you at all. You have now to be able to help yourself. And that is why, to a certain extent, we have to get the lab really kicking. Because if you can help yourself and do certain examinations, it means that what you're sending away can be minimized. You can send discrete samples. So you could tell a lab away, look, I want you to examine this item. It's a cutting from a pants or a shirt or this swab. So the persons away can say, well, okay, this load looks, you know, workable, and we will help St. Lucia. But the idea of wholesale 2-3 bags with items going up, people put you on the side. They're not looking at you until they have a chance.
If you were in a position to undertake certain actions in response to the crime situation we are experiencing right now, as of tomorrow, what are some of the measures that you would take?
In terms of?
Fighting crime, generally speaking, and you as a forensic scientist.
Are we going strictly for, are you talking a bit general?
General.
Well, general, I think the police, well, it starts, we want to look at the preventative. The preventative really has nothing to do with forensics, unless you're talking about a good functional laboratory, which, giving results, could act as a sort of a, you know, a little deterrent, because people seeing that, you know, there's analysis of crime work. But you would need to, the preventative, and that, I mean, Tim, that's a complex, that's a myriad of things, and involving education, involving social services, employment. But if you want to get back to the police will have to try and keep a lid on the areas. Now, it's interesting you mentioned that, because some years ago, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, they passed the anti-gang legislation. What is happening with the anti-gang legislation? That was passed. We now, 3 or 4 years later, have we had an arrest? Have we had a charge? Have we had a conviction under the anti-gang legislation?
But did that law pass through all its stages? I don't think the Governor General gave it
well, I have to be corrected on that. If not, because I think the last I heard from the minister, the previous minister, was that the police were not sufficiently prepared for that legislation. But that is worth checking.
But in any event, how do you determine that this is a gang? 2 or 3 or 4 people congregating by the roadside and just having a discussion or gallivanting? How do you determine?
Yeah, that's another aspect, and that's why that was largely a lot of the failure of the anti-gang legislation in Trinidad was for some of those same reasons. Because if you remember, during the state of emergency, yes, it was, and that they pulled in about over 1,000 people who were arrested and brought in. I mean, that figure was whittled down into 300 and 200 and 100 in almost a week, 2 or 3 weeks. As a matter of fact, one of the last cases was one of a notorious gang leader. And imagine, he's a notorious gang leader, well known, and his lawyer came in and he gave the Attorney General and the Commissioner in Trinidad, he said, in 24 hours, I want my man on the streets. And they had to back up, the DPP advised, and they had to put it. So there are problems in that. But we have it. Is it being effective? And that is really an issue. Now I noticed that there was a comment, I think coming out, I read that, but I think coming out from the police that a number of the gangs now, or some of the gang members, to get your stripes or to rise in the order, you have to commit a homicide. That gives you status. And that's the thinking could be what sometimes you get random. You say, but why, who would want to kill this person? Is to get stripes. Well, if that is correct, if that is so, that makes it even worse. That you have people in gangs doing random killings for stripes.
And should the police respond to this? Because we've heard time and time again the police cannot be everywhere, but there are calls for us to use the technology. I'm talking about the police in terms of CCTV cameras and so on.
Yeah. Well, that helps because CCTV, if you have a good system, CCTV don't get sick, it doesn't fall asleep once it's been well maintained. So that actually can help in your manpower constraints because that is clicking all the time. And these are some of the measures that have to be used. But then again, Tim, in all honesty, and this is not a question of this government or the past government, I think that governments generally, finance is an issue. So if you want to get a good CCTV program, you have to have the money. But then people will say it's got to be worth it because crime is bringing the country down.
So we are doomed.
Well, I mean, no, you have to prioritize. And government now has to prioritize and say, look, certain things we have to cut off because we need to get these things going, whether it is in the health system or in crime and law enforcement.
Are there certain opportunities from this crisis that we're experiencing right now? We've heard that out of any crisis, you must seek out the opportunities. What are the opportunities for us as a people out of the crime crisis we're experiencing right now?
In what respect?
Because I'm saying, shouldn't that jolt the people? Shouldn't that jolt the authorities? Shouldn't that jolt the citizenry now? We had 51 homicides into calling on whoever is responsible to effect the various changes, to take the appropriate steps to try at least to bring the problem under control. Now, Mr. Murray, admittedly, there are certain crimes that you really cannot prevent, you cannot stop.
Yeah.
Two men going at each other with knives and cutlasses, you cannot stop that.
Yeah.
One man deciding as well to go out there and to gun down another person, invariably the police cannot stop it. But don't you think that we need to at least to have a functioning forensic laboratory, well-trained police officers, and also we need to have the numbers at the Royal St. Lucia Police Force and the equipment, the resources, the vehicles.
Yeah. Now you talk about the people, and I think, and I've heard you make comments in another forum about the people are basically anesthetized. As people now have become indifferent to the homicides because it is so often fast and thing that they lost count and people not even, it's another murder again and another murder again. But then, so you find that people now are not giving it the focus that they should. But preventative, as I said, that's a myriad of issues, and that is with the police. But I always say, as a consolation, if somebody has been murdered, that person cannot be brought back. But there is a consolation to the family. And the consolation, it's only a consolation because you can't bring back the person. The consolation is, can we at least solve the murder? So the person can get closure.
How are we doing that department in terms of our detection rate?
The police would be able, the police should have the figures on that. But you have to be careful because, and it's a fact, we can't run away from that. You talk about what crimes, there are two sides of crime. Huh? There's a crime with the eyewitness, and there's a crime without the eyewitness. The test is not bringing resolution to the crime with the eyewitness. The real test is bringing resolution to the crimes without the eyewitness. And that is where the police might be, that might be the big challenge for our police officers, police investigative arm, is that and that is where the forensics comes in. Because, it pains me, Tim, that the resources we have, we have excellent equipment at that laboratory at Tapio. We have some of the finest, some of the best you can get in any part of the world. And I say that without reservation. But it's not being utilized. We have equipment that certain labs in the region established long before us don't have. And that is, and one of the things that I deal in science, and I know equipment, and the equipment that I have used, it's like family to me, because that's what I've been doing over the last 30, 35 years, using that equipment. And to have that equipment done for 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 years, that's not good. It's not good for the life of the equipment. You can't, especially the microscopes. We have a beautiful range of microscopes at that lab that you will not hardly see in the region. I was speaking to a lab director only a few days ago. Well, at one of the major labs in the Caribbean, and they don't have a quarter of the microscopes that we have. Our microscopy department is way ahead of theirs, but ours is not being utilized. And especially for microscopes, this is one of your main ammunition when you're talking about looking at exhibits. You want to send away for referrals. Let's do our homework. So like I said, when we do send something away, we're not sending 2 or 3 bags of clothes. We're sending discrete samples because we have used our microscopes to do our homework, so that when we send it off, we just send certain samples to get results from.
It was suggested several years ago that the forensic lab, its services could have been utilized by other islands in the sub-region in particular. How is that working? Obviously, we cannot sell our services to those islands if we cannot adequately attend to our own needs in St. Lucia.
Yeah, that's a little embarrassing, because then what are you selling? So, but it shouldn't be lost, because the reality is, all these look, if we are having these issues, Tim, you think if Grenada had a lab, they might not have the same issues? Or, so it shows us that it is, and I'm a firm believer that we've got to get back to an OECS initiative. We cannot run these labs on our own. St. Lucia has already started. They have the lab, so they should take the lead role. And the other islands should realize. It's not a question of saying, well, oh, St. Lucia will be more prominent than us. No. We have to use the St. Lucia lab, which is there, to help the other islands.
But because of the inefficient state of our own forensic laboratory, do you think we run the risk of losing opportunities that we could have benefited from if it was in a functional state? For example, selling our services to Dominica, Grenada, and those islands?
Surely, Tim.
And
surely.
Maybe they will be spurred into action and say, well, if St. Lucia cannot get its act together, then we, considering our own crime problem, then we should go ahead and set up our own facilities.
That would be unfortunate, and I think that would be an unfortunate error, mistake. But that could very well be the thinking.
It would not be their fault. It would be ours.
It would be our fault, because we should have been having our service sold, because I think that some contact, I think some time ago, was one of the islands for St. Lucia to help. I don't know how that went on. Many years ago, drug testing for Dominica was done in St. Lucia. We had the market, but we lost, and that was before we had the lab.
Okay.
We lost that market. Now we have that lab, the grand lab. You would think that we could have those markets. We don't have those markets. They're going elsewhere. And you know, the unfortunate thing is we have the OECS, you have this political or economic union, whatever it is. So it should not be too difficult for the heads of the Attorney General in the different islands or commissioners to say, look, let us, you know, we can't look at this insularity. We're pushing St. Lucia. No, crime is a problem, and we have to utilize the resources we have to serve us and our sub-OECS region.
You're watching Newsmaker Live. Let's take a break, because when we come back, I'm hoping to hear from you. We've been hearing from Mr. Louis Murray, who is a forensic scientist. We hope that we could have you also address the various issues, in particular relating to crime, and pose some questions to him, and let's have an interaction in just a moment. So please stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. We have a call on line. Hello, good evening. You're on the air. Hello.
Hey, good night.
Hi, good evening to you.
Hey, Tim, good night. It's a very nice program you've got, actually. It's a kind of heart-touching program here with Dr. Murray making these points here.
Yeah, Mr. Murray.
I just want to ask him a couple of questions.
It's calling from a very bad line, but go ahead quickly with your question.
Yeah, I just want to ask him, are there any St. Lucians who are still in this forensic technology overseas that can come back home? The government can either persuade them to come back home, Mr. Murray?
Okay, thanks a lot.
No, I'm not.
Okay, go ahead.
I am sure there are people studying away because some of the persons who were brought into the lab had studied away. So there must be a number of people. I heard not too long ago somebody on the radio saying about either a friend or family member of theirs who was studying forensics, but the person was disheartened by what was going on, and they would stay away and don't. And this whole thing is not encouraging for our new professionals.
We have another caller line. Hello, good evening. Go ahead, please. Hello. Yes, go ahead, caller.
Oh, Tim, sorry, I had a follow too.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, I want to ask him. I'm lamenting because the country has some challenges, admittedly. I noticed that there's this Deepwater Harbor in Port Castries, which is projected to be completed by December. So that's money spent on tourism, the leading industry. We need to protect both the citizenry and the tourist visitors who are coming in. I think, if I may suggest respectfully, that Mr. Murray can prepare a very composite executive report regarding what he's been saying and somehow get it to the cabinet sec or the prime minister, because what he's saying, they make so much sense and should not just be aired on the program for everybody to hear and no attention is being given to it. This has to be applied to our country, first for our youth and for the entire citizenry, as you're rightly saying. This is talent going to waste and money going to waste and talent going to waste. So I would want to employ him maybe to prepare a little executive report and submit it to the CAPSEC or to the Honorable Prime Minister, and let's take it from there. I think he's done the right thing tonight because the police, the Minister of National Security, have got a symposium coming on, which I think is dovetailing very well with what he's saying. So I want to employ him to, or maybe I should make a motion that he does that, and I get a second coming on later on.
Okay, thanks a lot, sir. What say you, Mr. Murray, to that
Yeah,
suggestion?
he's right from the aspect of we're talking about tourism and spending all that money. But, I mean, look, we've had some crimes, isn't there? There's a view fort on the yacht.
Yeah.
That's involving the tourism. And we're getting a lot of bad press in
the UK.
overseas.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful of how we operate.
We have another call. Good evening, you're on the air.
Yes, Tim. Blessed love.
Good evening to you, sir.
Blessed love.
Yeah, evening to you.
Yeah, you guys are talking about improving the forensic and improving fighting crime on the island and whatnot. To shed a light on something for you guys, the first thing that we have to understand is that the biggest problem we have in this country is the justice system. That's the biggest broken thing in this country. Now, when you have forensic young people coming from school, studying forensic and whatnot, and they don't have first hand, it doesn't make any sense. First and foremost, all those people are friends and colleagues with all the police officers, and most of those, I'm not bashing the police officers, but most of them are corrupt. I have suggested something to the minister.
Well, I don't think it's fair for us to say most of the police officers are corrupt.
Well, Tim, I'm
just
saying that based on something I know this is facts.
Yeah, but we can't say, I guess we could say some of the police officers, as the case with everyone in every profession. Some of the police officers be corrupt, but to say most, I don't know how we can determine that if we don't have the evidence. But go ahead, continue.
And I respect that opinion of yours. What I'm saying is that what we need to enter is a new age. We have a number of plainclothes police officers. We have a number of unmarked vehicles. There's our police vehicles. And guess what? Everybody knows the vehicles. Everybody knows the police officers. We need to go in a new age, and I have suggested that to the minister. He sent me to the commissioner, which I never saw. I went to the head, and he sent me to the middle. Now, we need to enter a new age, which is, taking people that are interested in having a change, making a change, have undercover police officers. You don't need to have police officers well-groomed. Could get Rastaman to be police officers. They are decent, loyal citizens that have the crown on their head. and willing to make a change. You need to get the common layman of the street who has a keen eye. I'm telling you that much. I'm going on a scene, on a crime scene, and I'm standing there, and I'm looking at the forensic team, do. And I could identify people in the crowd that actually knows something, that saw what happened, that knows something, that saw somebody run somewhere, that actually have information. But will they give it to the police? No, because they are scared. They have no security. They are scared. Okay? We don't need kids coming from school learning forensic. We need the people that are street smart, that could identify people that saw something. I'm going and look at people on the scene, and you could see those mumbling and pointing every single time there's a shooting and you don't catch the perpetrator or perpetrators or robbery, and you don't catch them. Every single time, those people come back when the police are there, when the crowd has assembled, and they look at what is going on. Every single time. I have witnessed that. Okay? So you don't need people coming from school that are book smart. Book smart only puts you so far. We need to get out of that thing with your credentials. You went to Harvard and you studied there. No. The people on the street that have the street smart.
Okola, we need to train people as well, huh?
We need the
train personnel, yeah.
To train the people with the book smarts team. That is what we need. We don't need people only with book smarts to come and say, yes, I could do that job, and they cannot do the job on the field.
Okay,
let's only tell you how to do the job on the field.
Hold on the line. Let's hear from Mr. Murray on that issue.
I appreciate. I am following the caller, and then basically you're talking about the change in dynamics, how we approach, and that's important because we are at a state where we have to try something. We have to keep changing, because if not, we basically stuck. I mean, crime is under increase, so we have to try something. And I appreciate what the caller is saying. Let's change the dynamics. He's talking about people street smart. He's talking about unmarked vehicles and so. But the other thing where I can agree and disagree slightly is that he spoke about the forensics. Now, yes, people are a little reluctant sometimes or often to come forward with the evidence. But Tim, we addressed that earlier. I am saying if a person is reluctant, they might not want to make a statement, they might not want to come to court. But if they can point the police in a direction off the record, then now your forensics will take it from there.
What's the caller? You good girl?
Yeah, well, I sympathize with what Mr. Murray is saying. Now, let me give you a scenario. And this is my own scenario. My girlfriend and I walked in the house, and the house was burglarized. We called the police. They spent a good while coming to the house. The forensic team got there. Tim, I'm telling the young ladies where to dust for prints. Because it's obvious how they got in, what they did, and how they did what they did. And I'm telling them where to dust for prints. Now, it's clear you could actually see fingerprints on the surface where I'm telling them to dust and where they did dust. And they are saying, well, sir, you and the kids and your wife, you are up and down. I'm saying, yes, but nobody have no reason to put their hand up here or do this or do that in that particular area. She did get fingerprints, but then she said it's not enough indentation, or she used some other word she maybe used, that is enough to get a fingerprint. And even if she got a fingerprint, how many of those criminals, those thieves, those gunmen, and all those other people that they have fingerprints on file, how many of them? So even if she did get a clear fingerprinting, can she tell me, okay, sir, we're going to run the print and we will get to know who that print belongs to? She cannot identify that. They just come to the crime scene to make people feel a little better, but people like me know better.
That nothing will come out of it.
Yeah, nothing comes out of it.
Caller, I will tell you that according to what I'm going on what you are saying, but the question of saying that you and your wife or your children, that shouldn't enter the picture at all, because they should be able to do what you elimination prints. So whoever is in the household, you take everything and you take the household to conduct your elimination.
Mr. Murray,
So
you are talking
that
about
shouldn't
eliminating fingerprints from the household and guests from the household.
Yeah.
Guess what? There were fingerprints all over, and she still said that there's not enough indentation to get a clear fingerprint.
Well, that's another aspect. If she,
Okay,
if
it's another
she's saying that,
aspect.
I suppose she's there and she has assessed that. I can't comment on that. But the aspect of the
I'm standing
elimination
right
prints.
there and I'm seeing the fingerprint. It is enough to get a fingerprint identified. And she's saying it's not enough. I just let it slide because I know nothing will come out of it, because I know better. I've been through it. I know better. But what I'm saying to you, Mr. Murray, I'm not bashing the forensic lab. You guys have a wonderful lab up there. What you need is people with a keen eye, not people that will do textbook work on a crime scene.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a corporation of the public.
Well, you see, then again, you don't want people that act like police officers or people that act like they bossy to people. You have a keen eye and you spot something. They always have people in the vicinity that saw something, that heard something, that have good information to solve a case.
Yeah, that's true.
You just need people to identify those people
come
and
forward.
approach those people in the correct way.
they need
Because
to
I
come
tell you
forward.
that much, if I go on a crime scene to solve a crime and identify some people that I think that have information, credible information to solve a crime or that crime, I can approach them and assure them to give me the information that they have, and it will not be exposed to them or they will not be in any danger. I can't do that. But the policemen we have now, the forensic staff we have now, they cannot assure people of any of that. They can't even approach people. The
All right,
policemen, when they approach people, they are so hostile towards the public. You know? But, Mr. Murray, I commend you on your efforts, Tim, as well. But, guys, we need to move in that stage that we are in and enter a new phase. Because the criminals, they are getting smarter. They are getting more technical. Right now, criminals are doing what they're doing, and they have runners. When they do their thing and the police are coming, before the police get halfway to them, they're either long gone, the guns are long hidden, everything is clean, because by the time the police start passing, phone calls have been made, WhatsApp has been sent, all of that has happened already. You don't need police in clothes anymore.
Caller, what?
All right, caller. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Quite an eye-opener.
In essence, Tim, what the caller is saying is that they're using the technology, so law-abiding people have to use the technology too, and the police have to get into the technology. Their technology might be simple, but they're using it
It's effective.
So we have to, police
Another
have
call.
to use
Good evening. Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
Good
You're
evening,
on the air.
caller. Good evening.
Hi. Hi. I'm calling in connection with the forensics lab. Well, the last caller was talking about saying that somebody should have a keen eye instead of being a qualified forensic scientist. Now, for this caller, forensic science is the application of science to solve a crime. So how could somebody with a keen eye with no prior knowledge help solve a crime? But anyway, let's just move away from this.
Caller, let me just come in a little. I believe he was talking more about the public, people at the crime, at the scene who might have information. I didn't get the impression he was throwing that because remember Tim made the comment, but you need to have the trained people also.
Yeah.
I don't think he was referring to the forensic people. I think it's the general public. That's what I think.
Yeah, go ahead, caller.
All right. Hold on. All right. Also, a lot of people state that crimes are not solved in St. Lucia because of the lack of the use of the forensics lab. But I don't think this is really the case. From my perspective, also I've also witnessed some officers analyze crime scenes and whatnot. I think is the lack of training on the officers' part. Because some of them, they don't collect the evidence properly. They don't assess properly also. So I just think that some of the officers need to be trained to collect the data, analyze the data and whatnot.
We covered that.
Okay, thank you so much for calling, sir.
Yeah, we covered that. Tim, let me...
Appreciate the contribution.
Let me just come in there quickly. One of the things, I'll give you something. One of the things that is expected of a crime scene officer examiner today is to be able to identify and collect evidence that he cannot see. So you ask me, but how can you collect evidence that you can't see? But that is the technology, because there's a lot of evidence invisible to the naked eye, and you can go over that crime scene 50 times.
With the right equipment.
You have to have the right equipment, and that is the technology. So if you don't have the technology, you're missing that level of evidence, and that usually is in the trace evidence area. That's why technology is very important.
Good evening. Go ahead with your contribution, caller.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, good evening to you, sir.
How are you? Evening,
I'm all
Mr.
right.
Murray.
Good evening, caller.
A caller you had a couple of calls ago. He was very much on the right track when it comes down to the, if you will, the analytical ability and the competence of the police. Now, I notice that whenever we speak to that, people are always in a sort of say, don't bash the police force. But don't forget, we have been in this thing. In my case, I mean, I'm 60-something years old. And all my life, I've seen a lot of police incompetence over the years. But yet still people keep on saying the police force is good. They are good ones. The problem is the quality of the police force is our problem. I'll give you an example, a couple of examples that happened to me personally. A few years ago, there was a burglary at an office I was involved in. And in that office, whilst there was a lot of havoc around the office, it was clear that the concentration of the break-in was on one particular place. The CPU was taken, and also what was removed was the handset for the portable phone. That's all that was taken for the office, despite the whole thing was being ransacked. This, in spite of this obvious literal direction as to where the questioning should have gone, the police did nothing. This is about 10 years ago. To this day, apart from the morning when they came to the office, no policeman has ever come back to me on this thing. Lo and behold, the other day, I looked on television and I'm seeing one of the police officers who was involved in this thing is now a senior police officer. And he is talking about strategy and so on. Now, when you take that into consideration, what do you leave for the rest? If somebody who was part of a team could not see a crime in front of his face, what are you going to see? And this is the problem. The personnel in our police force is not up to scratch. I made a suggestion the other day. What we should be doing is trying to upgrade the quality of person going into the police force by giving incentives to the persons who can be trained, who are trainable to get in there, and perhaps choose various careers within the police force. For example, I am suggesting that we have a minimum of 2, I think you call it CAPE these days, 2 CAPE subjects for any recruit to the police force. It's not going to be easy at first because you won't get all what you want. But over a period of time, we can phase that requirement in. But to entice people to go in, you can say, for example, if somebody of that ilk comes into the police force and he or she does 4 years satisfactory work, that person should be given a scholarship to go off to study a subject of their choice. Obviously, maybe you could push them in the direction of forensics and the things related to the justice system. When they graduate, when they come back, bind them to the public service, more specifically police force, for another 2 years. Over a period of 15, 20, 30 years, we will gradually get the kind of people we want inside there, which are thinking people. The quality of the crime has changed. You can't have people going out there and just literally moving there like a bull in a china shop. It's not going to work. You have to sit back sometimes and analyze the situation and work things out.
Yeah.
The point.
Yes, hold on, caller.
Possibly, caller. I just want to interject that if they go away with the scholarship as a sort of a incentive for having performed well, then they could come back and ask to train some of the junior staff and bring them up to a certain level, because they can't qualify them, and that junior staff at that then now can go away and further their studies. So it's like a cycle. Each one is helping the other.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And over a period of time, we'll get this gradual movement. It's not going to happen overnight.
No, not overnight.
We'll get this gradual movement towards where we want to go. Now, the point the guy was talking about, somebody standing back from the crowd and looking on around the crowd, and you can actually see potential witnesses. This is not new stuff in terms of crowd surveillance. No. When you walk through airport like Miami, New York, or London, and so on, the customs officers do not open every single bag.
That's
These
profiling.
guys are sitting in the banks of cameras of screens, and they're looking for the person who is too fidgety, the fella who is sweating while everybody else is cool, the person, he's looking for those telltale signs. You will see these things at the crime, because one thing is sure, a criminal doesn't go far away. Yeah. He's got to know what's happening so he can fix up his story. And perhaps instead of the police diving in, 1, 2, 3, 4 could stand away from the crowd and just look, forget the crime scene, look at the people in the crowd. And it's these kind of things that allow us to catch criminals, but we don't seem to be able to think, and we're suffering for that. Finally, just one last question before I go.
Sorry.
Why is the lab located on the edge of the sea? And I'm speaking in terms of the sensitivity and the expense of that equipment. Why was it located there? This one, pure insanity. Thanks.
Thank you so much for calling, sir. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that was that speaks to another thing: choice, the location, and remember I spoke earlier on about the preparedness. So these were two factors that have really hit the lab. But people talk about the sea blast, and so we have to work with that. It's there already.
Good evening.
Good evening, Tim.
Hi. Good evening to you, sir.
Yeah, good evening to you guys.
Good evening, caller.
Wonderful contribution. Sometimes I wonder if we are really, really ready in St. Lucia to tackle crime head on, because I just don't understand. Team, for years,
caller, you're not alone. You're not alone.
For years, we heard that the policemen are not equipped, the policemen are not properly trained. Team, this thing has been going on and on and on. Team, listen. For so many years in St. Lucia, we have been talking and talking and talking. We don't demand things. Tim, the powers that be keep telling us sometimes finance is the problem. They cannot finance this, they cannot finance that. But Tim, right before our very eyes, we see millions of dollars are being wasted. Not today. You meant to tell me, training with the citizenry, we don't demand things. The taxpayers of this country do not demand from the powers that be. Tim, we need the policemen to be properly trained. The citizenry can help demand that. Send them to get proper training. The people don't have facilities. We keep hearing that over and over. Lack of equipment, team, time after time, the same thing. Lack of facility training, team, that is a problem. But are we demanding that people? We need to get these men, whether it's the police, whether it's the fire service, if the men are not properly trained, and even if they are trained and they come back home and they don't have the equipment to work with, then we will still suffer. That has been going on for years, whether it's the fire service, and I know what I'm telling you because I was in there. Tim, we have to demand the powers that be put our taxpayers' money into proper use. That is urgent. We want to solve crime. Are we going to keep having program after program, meeting after meeting, town hall meeting? Tim, that is not going to take us nowhere. Let us tackle the thing head on. Send the men out there to be trained. Our taxpayers' money, put it into good use. We need training. We need men. We need men, manpower. We are suffering. I just don't understand. All these powers that be, they keep promising, team, and we're not demanding from them.
Then we make excuses until it hit home. It's only when sometimes a certain family member get killed or something, you hear them come out talking. But until it hit home, we do nothing. How are we going to tackle this thing there? Even if we have meetings after meetings, program after program, and we don't have the proper trainings, we don't have the manpower, we don't have proper facility, team, we are going to suffer. And we want to compare our police officers with the police officers in the U.S. and other places. How can they be like that when they don't have the training and the equipment to work with?
Makes a lot of sense, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
And Tim, what he's talking about lack of this, but we're in a little reverse here with the lab, because here we have a facility which is well equipped, so that's not an excuse.
Because can you imagine, prior to the lab's opening, the opening of the lab in 2010, I'm sure we'll be discussing this issue and saying we need a lab.
Yes, yes.
Now we have a lab.
Now we have a lab
properly equipped,
and it's
not well manned.
It's not well manned, and that is really, really sad, because I mean, viewers can't do that. But if a viewer was able to take a walk through that lab, I mean, it would be amazing what one would see in there.
A final call. Good evening, you're on the air.
Yes, Tim, good night.
Good night to you, sir.
Good night.
Tim, I was just listening to the passion in the last caller's voice, and, I can't help but to agree with him, because what we seem to be doing here, or to be able to do here, is to waste money. I mean, last night I was listening to a program and on the same station, and I tried calling because, I heard certain things with regards to getting persons aware, raising awareness. And the strategy to raise the awareness was to light up buildings. And I'm saying, but who would be benefiting from that? I mean, the only institution I think that would really be benefiting from lighting up of buildings would be Lucilec. How are the people going to be sensitized by you lighting up buildings or become aware? I would think that what you would want to do is to probably go out to the homes and to encourage people to, proceed to the courts, regardless how tedious they think it might be. Go to the courts with their matters and stop thinking that by reporting it to the police that, it is the end of your responsibility and that it will be taken care of from there. And so it's the same thing with the crime situation. We keep hearing about porous borders. We have those issues, and millions are being spent on everything else except, the things that would solve crimes. I really don't understand, how we expect this country to get better. We seem to be, experts at wasting money, and that is where the focus should be, in my view.
All right, thank you so much. Your reaction to this, Mr. Murray?
Yeah, the thing is, yes, training. I think the general consensus from callers is the aspect of training. Training is something that we really need, because especially for crime scenes are dynamic. Things are changing. So look in the States, Tim. I know when I used to go up to programs in the States, if you want a crime scene team, every year, at the end of every year, you had to show cause why you would not be kicked out from the team. And the cause and what you would have to show is that within that year, I have done 1 or 2 training. You must. Guys were hustling at the end of the year to get in 1 or 2 training programs because they know they would be kicked out. So training is we have to keep hitting the training. And so far as the lab is concerned, they have to increase the staff base. The staff base has to increase. It has to be increased too with people who can get into casework. And whilst they're doing the casework, they can train junior staff members. So you get a bite from both ends.
About how many new employees you think the forensic laboratory needs to be fully functional?
Well, I would think that each of the major departments you'd need at least 2. Well, you need at least 2 persons. You either have to have 2 persons of competence or 1 person of competence with a trainer. and that is just in theory, to get. But if you look at the casework demands, because I remember the last homicide I did, it took me 2 months. So if it took me 2 months to do investigations in a homicide matter, that is 6 in the year. What is our murder rate? That means you see how you're already into a backlog. So you need staff, because if you're doing the work, you have to do it properly. So all how you from whatever angle you look at it, staff, numbers, and good training, and that will move you. Well, apart from other things, you have to get the lab, operational insofar as the demands, your quality control, and these other things. But you need to get these things going.
Final comments from you, sir?
Well, I think I have said as much as I can, and the callers, I think, are aware of what's going on. But I want to leave something. This statement that it's a statement I always go back to. That, and I have to say that because sometimes there is the impression, I heard somebody saying that forensic. Now we have to be careful that open the lab or forensics will solve crime. There are a lot of crimes, you see it in bigger countries, that even with the forensics, you don't make the success or the headway that you would expect. So I would want to say that the use of forensics is not an absolute guarantee of success, but it is an absolute guarantee that the right thing was being done towards achieving success. So I need to say that because I don't want people to have the impression that the lab will solve. Or you open the lab tomorrow, or fully functional, and all our cases will be solved. It doesn't really work like that, because what you put in is what you get out.
Thank you very much, sir, for being my guest on this evening's
my pleasure.
Newsmaker Live.
My pleasure.
And to you, thank you so much for taking time off to watch the broadcast and to contribute via your calls. If it's Wednesday, it's Newsmaker Live. Time now for the clip that peaked.
So, are you ready to go to the movie?
Heck yeah! What you talking about? I came hella prepared.
What are you doing?
About to go to the movies. Come on. About to be a blockbuster.
We are sitting on the sidewalk. We're not at a movie theater.
Oh man, listen, I got the popcorn. It's about to be amazing. Just wait for it. Look, don't worry.
There's nothing happening.
It's the opening credits. Just wait for it. Just wait for it. Good old time.
I swear to God, I didn't know he had a girlfriend. He really had a girlfriend.
Oh, we got my Oreos, man. Hey, the Oreos, homie. Yo, Oscar performance. Don't kill us.
Where's the idiot that parked in front of my driveway?
Dude just came up the trash can. Oh, she got a gun.
Can we do this again?
We gonna do it all the time, girl. Hey, so we gonna go back in the house since the movie over?
Once again, that's the broadcast. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Timothy Paulion, saying good night and see you next time.